Oh, well.
Sorry, I don't know what's going on.
And we can show documents, Gail, you know, as needed or as you need, just let us know. And I can actually go ahead and share the tree committee agenda for today. Good afternoon, everybody. I want to welcome you to the December 7th meeting of the tree committee, 2 o'clock for the city of Kalamazoo. We'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. We'll begin with a roll call for members. My name is Anthony Ladd, and I'm with the Public Services Department.
Brian LaBelle, Forestry Supervisor for Public Services.
Steve Skalski, City of Kalamazoo, Water Superintendent and Assistant City Engineer.
Gail Walter, Environmental Concerns Committee Representative.
Eric Inyard, I'm a forester with Consumers Energy.
All right, I think that'll take care of all of the members here today. Would like to go ahead and begin with introductions of guests for today's items. If you could, I guess we'll go by order that I can see. Anita.
Anita Emery DeVisser with Wood, and providing technical support to the team in the Superfund site and the work that's going to be happening on the river here in the next year or so.
Okay, welcome. And Chaz.
Hey, Chad Robinson. I'm also with Wood and an engineer working on the Superfund project that's coming up.
Welcome. And last but not least, Chase.
Hi, Chase Gerbig with Wood. I'm the remediation engineer and the project manager for the Superfund site and the Verberg Park and an associated clearing project in front of you.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. That'll conclude our introduction of guests. Provided to most members today was the agenda packet. I wanted to make sure everybody had a chance to look through that agenda, see if there's any questions or comments or changes. And if not, if somebody would make a motion to approve the agenda for today.
Motion to approve the agenda.
Support.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, the agenda passes for today. Also included in your packet were the minutes from the November 2nd meeting last month. Were there any edits or changes or questions in those minutes?
I saw a couple instances where Brian was listed as both committee chair and committee member. So that's my only edit.
Okay.
Everything else looked good.
We will get that edited in the November 2nd minutes, just to make sure they reflect, accurate standing. Other than that, is there an approval for the November 2nd agenda from last month? Or a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Support.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Moving right along to new business. I would like to make a note before we get started. On your agenda, we do have 2 items for today. The first one is Verberg Park and the Kalamazoo River presented by Wood. The second item, 105 Walbridge Street with Adams Outdoor. I would like to table that item for today. I think there's a little bit of question on location of the trees and whether or not they fall into city right of way and within the jurisdiction of the tree committee. So we're going to work to kind of get a little bit better understanding of where those trees are actually located before we make a decision that might not be ours to make. And if it does turn out that those are indeed in our right of way, we will have this item back on the agenda. But I would like to table that for today. Any questions or concerns on that? Great. With that, I will let Wood kind of present this item to the committee. I would like to say though that the packet that you sent for review and approval was great. I appreciate all the detailed information. There was a lot to look through, but it was very thorough. So thank you for doing that. That's not always the case with items that we get. I have what you had sent to us pulled up. I can pull that up and kind of move along as you want to if you want to show us the visuals or describe the project, whatever's going to work best for you to kind of reflect to the committee what you're asking for, or we can give you the ability as well to share your screen.
Yeah, Anthony, I'll jump in first before I kick it over to Chad and Anita. And if you wouldn't mind to bring up figure 1 and share that can sort of serve as the background for what
Okay.
we're discussing. I guess first I want to say thank you all for reading through that material and giving us an opportunity to chat with you. We're here on behalf of our clients, Georgia Pacific and International Paper, who are working on the remediation of the Kalamazoo River. And in order to accomplish that remediation and removal of sediment, we've got to have an upland place to manage that sediment.
Hey, and Chase, sorry to interrupt you. You're
Yep.
kind of going in and out a little bit at least on
Oh,
mine.
really?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Let's see if we got a connection issue here. Is that any better?
It is.
Okay. So we're working on remediating the Kalamazoo River. And in order to effectively do that, we need a decent sized chunk of property to serve as a laydown area and to manage this sediment as we take it out of the river. What we presented to you is really specific to the tree ordinance and the tree committee's purview, but we're happy to expand this discussion if folks have questions about what we're doing more holistically. As this project gets rolled out, we understand that we've tried to touch a lot of different people and make sure everybody's informed, but we don't want to lose an opportunity to do that either. That said, we'll keep the discussion focused on the tree ordinance unless you want us to go farther afield, and we're happy to talk about more if you're interested.
I think it is really important to explain why at some point, but
I'm happy to jump into that then, Anthony. So at the highest level, there's contaminated sediment in the river. It's contaminated with PCBs, and as I'm sure a lot of you know, the stretch from essentially just upstream of downtown from Morrow Dam all the way down to Lake Allegan is in some phase of investigation or remediation associated with contaminated sediment in the river. And that contaminated sediment manifests most prominently in fish and impacts the fish, which then can impact other ecological receptors and can impact human receptors, that is fishermen who are eating the fish and so on. And so our goal is to remove the most significant contamination mass in what we call Area 1. The river's broken into a bunch of different chunks, but Area 1 is the most upstream portion of the river. And we're working in a portion of the river first from Gull Road, essentially down through a small area in Parchment, a couple mile stretch of the river. And there are going to be a lot of different, over the next, say, 10 years or more, areas of the river that need to be remediated. We're starting in the for the most part, the most upstream river. We will ultimately have to go upstream to Mares Riverfront Park at some point and in the river adjacent to that, and that'll be a few years out. But this scope of work that we're looking at is a 3-year project that will remediate the sediment from Gull Road in certain areas where there are higher concentrations of PCBs and move downstream, mostly between Gull and Mosul, with a small area, like I said, in Parchment. And in particular, we're looking at, and this is where the tree clearing comes in and the tree ordinance comes in. One of the areas that we're remediating is Verberg Park Pond and some of the areas that are upstream of Patterson Street. And in order to accomplish this remediation, what we've got to do is we're dredging the sediment. It's really nothing more elegant or fancy than digging up the sediment and managing it in the upland. But in order to do that effectively, we've got to dig it out of the river, and then we've got to process it, because what we don't want to do is send soup, right, mud, down highways. We want to make sure that the sediment is set up and stable, and we'll ultimately be disposing of it offsite at a landfill. And so the way projects like this typically unfold is you dredge the sediment out of the river, and then you manage it in an upland area, adding stabilizing agents before you send it offsite for disposal. And so what we're asking for here is authorization to clear trees for really 2 purposes in Verberg Park, as well as 2 other parcels, one the wastewater treatment plant parcel and another small parcel, for 1 of 2 reasons. Either to establish our sediment processing area, we'll want to manage that material, or because most of the sediment is along the banks of the river, there are a number of locations where we've got to clear trees in order to be able to maximize the removal of sediment up to the banks. That is, to effectively remediate the contamination that's present. And that can be 1 of 2 reasons. One, either we can't necessarily get equipment right to the shoreline, or sometimes, particularly down by the wastewater treatment plant, and Chad can speak to this, we've got to put sheet piling in, which is really where we drive vertical sheets of metal to hold the bank in place while we dig right up to the edge of the bank. But you can imagine if you're going to put a 20 or 30 or even 40-foot piece of metal into the ground, you've got to have some vertical clearance to push it into the ground. And the nature of the trees in this area is a lot of them, right, are reaching out over top of the river to get as much sunlight as they can. And so we may have to clear some of those trees back in certain areas to ensure our ability to effectively and maximally remove that contaminated sediment. Before I kick it over to Chad to sort of talk through some of the specifics, what I want to make sure you all understand is right now what we're asking for is authorization to clear trees to the minimum amount that we need to within the footprint that we've identified. And we identified that in 2 figures. This is figure 1, which shows the proposed tree clearing maximum extent within Verberg Park, as well as on the eastern side of the river across from Verberg Park. And then figure 2 looks at the wastewater treatment plant. We're in the phase of this where we've put forward a 95% design to EPA and Eagle, and we're currently working through their comments. And the way this typically unfolds is you put forward a design to the agencies, we get approval on that design, and then we put it out to bid. And we're also going through the bidding process right now. What we don't specifically know is exactly which trees the contractor is going to need to remove in order to affect this remedy, in order to implement this remedy. What we do know, though, is the areas that we're going to need to remove trees in. And so our goal, our goal is both from a sort of financial as well as maintenance standpoint. We don't want to remove any more trees than we need to, and to complete the remedy. But we are asking for your authorization to remove trees within this footprint, specific trees to be determined down the road as we work with the contractor. And instead of looking at this right now, which is the a conceptual sediment processing area to really develop an agreement on the areas in which we can work, and then provide you an inventory down the road once we have identified exactly which trees are going to be removed to ultimately remove them. Chad, you want to jump in, talk a little bit about what will happen in Verberg Park and sort of the considerations that we have here?
Sure. Yeah, I guess, are there any questions before we kind of talk about this a little bit further?
I'll hold my questions back, but I do think, you know, as part of this request, something that's important, and I guess that makes your request a little bit different, is the remediation work, and you know what you're proposing to replace those trees that are removed, and kind of how that would be counted. Sounded like, based on your letter, that would be done after the fact, after the work was done, but sounded, based on what you just said there, that there might be, that there will be a count of trees available prior to removal.
I would think it would be simultaneous with removal, Anthony. It essentially, we would inventory them as we plan to take them out.
And that you intend to replace one for each tree that you remove on this site.
That's correct. And I would say one for one, in working in concert with the Parks Department. We've worked pretty extensively with the Parks Department. You can imagine, one doesn't just put this plan out and argue that we should be allowed to close Verberg Park. In fact, last night the City Commission signed our access agreement to close Verberg Park for a year. We're working with the county on closing the trail that goes through there. But we're working hand in hand with Patrick, especially to bring this project to fruition.
No questions yet. I just some things to make sure to touch.
Sure.
Okay. Well, I guess I'll start by just kind of explaining this figure a little bit. So the light blue colors, those are the areas where we'll be dredging. So the intent is kind of to work upstream to downstream. So work will probably start in Verberg Park Pond. We'll do the dredging there, and then work proceeding in the river, starting over at it's called SED 118. And all these different areas have different names. This one's called SED 118, and then going down to KRT 4, closer to Patterson Street Bridge. So the work you see in this figure here is expected, to take probably 1 year to complete, starting next spring with the dredging work. And then sediment as it's dredged will be offloaded on the shoreline here, and then we'll construct a sealed containment pad with sediment we stockpiled and dewatered, and then we'll have trucks coming and going, taking the sediment off site to the landfill. And then once we're done dredging, backfill will be placed, so putting in the sand backfill, and then working on the restoration elements. But getting back to the tree clearing, so that's one of the I can go over this one too if you like. So this work in figure 2 is going to be the second year of work, so that would be 2023. And this is in front of the water reclamation plant. And the majority of this shoreline here, I don't think it's shown in this figure, but all requires sheeting. So as Chase described, there's going to be a temporary sheet pile installed. The dredge cuts here are deeper than some of the other areas. So to be able to remove, the targeted material and sediment, we have to go pretty deep right up to the shoreline. So that's the reason and rationale for the sheet pile wall. So that'll be installed. The sediment will be removed, and then the backfill placed up against the sheet pile wall, stabilization backfill, and then the sheeting will be pulled back out. And then the banks and disturbed areas will be restored. In year 2, we don't plan on using Verberg Park Pond. So the sediment that's dredged here will be taken to most likely graphics packaging property, just to the right of this figure. And there'll be a temporary processing and staging area over on that property. Yeah, if you want to go back to figure 1, we can talk about the first things that need to happen. So we have a bat window. There's endangered species. I think it's the Indiana bat. So their nesting season to work, we don't want to disturb their nesting areas. So we need to remove trees, do any tree removal work by March 31st. At least that's our goal. So we'd like to get started on this, this winter. So that would be the first activity that's probably going to have to happen here at the site. The intent is, go through and do an inventory, and then, mark which trees need to come out based on where they are, how they're overhanging the river, or if they're impacting the access, and then do that removal, clearing. So that includes, overhanging limbs and trees around the pond, and then some of the trees that are within the staging area. As Chase said, we don't have a remedial contractor selected yet. And this staging area is conceptual at this point, but once they've been awarded the project, we'll be working directly with them to identify which areas, they need for access and for setting up their staging area. But more or less, we envision it being within these boundaries that are shown.
And then Chad, that restoration, because we're using Verberg Park for a year, our anticipated restoration would be at the end of that year.
Yep. Yeah, so as work finishes up next year, 2022, the dredging work will start the rest work. And that's where, the one-to-one tree replacement, there'll be seeding, and disturbed areas will be restored. And then we have, I think you have our restoration details and specs that include the planting list and different species for shrubs and trees. And then, we can work with the Parks Department to identify any other special trees that they may want, in the park area.
And right now, our proposed plan is to restore at a 1-to-1 ratio, although not necessarily in the same locations where trees are removed, but rather to work with the Parks Department to come up with the right planting that works both ecologically as well as functionally for the Parks Department. Chad, do you want to talk for a second about the species lists and how we developed those? Not just trees, but also shrubs and so on.
Yeah, those were developed with coordination with the Kalamazoo Nature Center on a previous project. So those include, kind of some preferred native species that are hopefully going to thrive here in this type of environment. So I guess we're open to suggestions if there's any changes to that list. And then I guess another important part to point out is the parcels that we're talking about. The Verberg Park pond, you can kind of see the outline there, but then there's also a city parcel other side of the river along Ray Street. I believe that's Public Services has an easement there for a sewer crossing. So the assumption is that that's within the tree committee's purview.
I think Consumers also owns a parcel right there too.
Yes, yep, on the other side of the river. Right on by Gull. But yeah, we've been in communication with Consumers. Lisa Groom has been our point of contact on that. We're working on getting the access in there. And also the Brownfield property. But that's my understanding that's a separate separate entity from this committee. We've been talking with Jamie McCarthy on that one.
And then I suppose it bears mentioning too that there's, of course, private property that we're seeking to access with individual property owners, where similar scopes of work will occur, and similar, not just similar, the same restoration approaches and so on will occur.
Is this area right here along the other side of city property? Is that going to be temporary sheet piled as well? Some more deeper excavation?
Nope, that'll just be a shoreline excavation. It doesn't require any sheeting, but there's a lot of down trees and trees overhanging the river right in that spot. So there'll have to be some coordination with that property owner on clearing activities.
It probably does bear mentioning too in terms of taking down trees versus removing the root bulbs. In a perfect world, we would be able to leave all of the root bulbs in place. They provide really excellent bank stabilization. In places where we don't need to put in sheeting, that's more viable than in places where we do need to put in sheeting. Overall, though, whether it's removing trees or removing root bulbs, our goal is to remove as little as we can in order to enhance and speed up the restoration. And that, you know, to the extent that we do need to remove a tree but leave a root bulb, we'll have replantings in those areas that take advantage of that stabilized shoreline associated with the root bulb. There may be some locations where we need to pull out the root bulbs too, although we'd like to avoid it if we can.
Like in the city park property, you know, if we have to take down a tree right in the middle of the park, we're not just going to leave the stump there. We'll end up removing that and leveling it and restoring that back to grade.
Yeah, bank stabilization was going to be one of the big questions that I had, you know, especially along these areas of the river or even over here. Yeah, just making sure that had been taken into account with your restoration plan,
Yeah.
that we don't lose that bank over time. We plant something or, you know, leave as much as possible to try to keep that slope, that bank stable.
Yeah.
And that's actually part of the basis for the sheet piling, Anthony, is that allows us to leave more material in place there. And what we didn't put in this package for the tree committee, although we're happy to share it with you or anyone else in the city that's interested, is places where we're putting in sheet piling and then excavating right to the edge of the sheet piling. We'll be backfilling back up to a grade that maintains a stable bank on the other side of that sheet piling, right? What we don't want is a big cliff into the river. That's bad for everybody. So what we actually do is build that back up with clean material so that when we remove the sheet piling, there's a consistent and stable slope there that maintains that bank. And I don't know how many hours of Chad's life has been spent putting out those plans together, but
if you go to page 11 there, Anthony, I think on the
Isn't that where
PDF.
some of the
Yeah,
shrubs are going?
Yeah, that kind of details the backfill and restoration in different, you know, when we pull out the sheet pile.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think as this project moves forward, you know, I think we would certainly prefer to leave as many of the larger diameter tree species as possible. You know, there's some mature trees there. I have a feeling though it's a similar density and diversity with the trees that were removed as part of the consumers project. I don't know if there's been any if there's any write up on what species are there currently, or what we as a committee would even like to see try to be salvaged. But
What I'm more or less a little bit worried about is when you remove all them trees, the changing of the temperature of the water, what that'll do to the ecosystem of that riparian zone. That's my main concern. I think is it'll take a long time for them trees, if even the trees can grow over that and get back to whatever the system is right now.
And I can speak to that a little bit. So part of the premise of this work is to do the dredging work, the remediation, largely from the water. And there may be some locations where we need to access the shoreline and dredge from the shoreline, but part of the purpose of that is that that is doing it from the water, is that we don't need to clear cut the shoreline in order to maintain that really important riparian zone. There may be trees that are hanging well out over the water that we do need to pare back. But what we won't be doing is clear cutting the entire perimeter, but rather selecting individual trees that need to come out. Partly for that reason,
Yep.
to maintain the bank stability and the ecological.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that we're on the same page on that.
Yep.
was there anything else that you wanted to touch on before we open up to questions, or Chad or Chase or Anita?
I don't think so.
Okay. Are there any questions from the committee? Steve or Gail, Brian? Eric?
So I have a couple of questions. In your staging area, what options could be considered for staging this processing area in an area in this site that doesn't already have trees in it? I mean, I noticed you've got like a big parking lot here and lots of construction trailers and other areas that maybe could be used without the necessity of tree removal just for that processing. So, how can we think outside the box and think of some other potential areas?
I suppose there's two answers to that question, Gail. One is we think this is the least invasive approach possible, notwithstanding the fact that it is invasive. Here's part of the reason why we don't want to utilize some of the spaces that look like they may be available. One is significant overhead utilities. Where the cursor is right now and the word haul road is, there's some major sewer underground utilities in sewer lines, as well as overhead utilities in terms of electrical lines. And the risks associated with working underneath those are high. Another consideration for us is that what we don't want to do is process sediment within a floodplain. And the closer you get to Verberg Park Pond, the more you get into the floodplain. It would be a bad outcome if we were working and processing sediment in some of the open areas, sort of what you see there between Verberg Park Pond and the Hall Road, and were to have a major flood event that could significantly impact not just the project, but spread sediment around that is impacted and have a real negative effect. One of the things that we do think helps minimize the impact here is twofold. Doesn't make a ton of sense there, but one of the things is using the haul road to move in between sort of that throat. There are a number of trees there, and our plan is to work with the contractor to minimize the impact associated with those the Hall Road and some of the large and mature trees that are present there. I do have some concerns though about an ability to route a Hall Road through there, that there may be an opportunity to route it and leave the trunk standing, but we could significantly damage the root zones. And so I'm not confident that we would be able to ensure the survival of all of the trees within that throat, even if we did limb some back, because we could negatively impact the trees. So the root zone. So we've tried to minimize the impact there, but we can't guarantee we won't do it. The other piece, if you zoom out a little bit, Anthony, is that we have, you can see some of the Verberg Park processing area, on the bottom right side of that. You can see right there, it goes all the way to the fence line. We were out there with contractors a week ago. And I think it's everyone's goal to utilize as little space as possible to do that. And that would very much minimize the number of trees. And there's really another reason for doing that. And that's that we don't want to get any closer to the residences to the bottom right there, which is actually southwest on this figure. We don't want to get any closer to those residences than we need to as well. So there's dual purposes there to keep that as small as possible. We just don't know exactly the footprint that we're going to need. So
Yeah. The other thing I'll add is, duration of impact to the park. If we have a smaller space to work in, but we still have the same volume of sediment to remove, that just ends up extending our schedule and means that the park would likely have to be closed for a longer time to do the same amount of work. So that's kind of a balancing point, is sizing the processing area to minimize impacts, but also big enough to be able to accomplish the work within kind of a 1-year work window.
And one of the ways that we've tried to minimize impacts to the city residents is this is a 3-year project, but we're only planning to use Verberg Park for a single year and moving to private property downstream to process sediment in subsequent years.
Well, you had mentioned when you're going to be doing dredging on the other side of the river, that the sediment from there is going to go to Georgia Pacific property to be processed. What's the possibility of taking all of it to Georgia Pacific to process?
The graphics packaging property, it's
I'm sorry, graphics packaging. That's
no worries. We pretty regularly mix up GPI and GP. It's not possible for 2 reasons, and we've pushed really hard to try and make that happen. The first is that graphic packaging has a major construction project going on next calendar year, and so we wouldn't be able to utilize the space that we need next calendar year in order to implement this project. The second piece, though, is that in any case, we need to remediate Verberg Park Pond, which would require most of the impacts that you see here, except for the sediment processing area. A lot of this impact would need to happen in any case. And furthermore, if we were to process sediment at the graphic packaging property, we would still need some ability to get sediment, not just out of Verberg Park Pond, but from Verberg Park over to graphic packaging. And so that could involve either opening up the throat from the river into Verberg Park Pond or trucking it across. And these are things that just were not feasible to accomplish. So ultimately, this is the least impactful approach that we could put forward.
Any other questions, comments?
I got one comment. In section 3.4E, you state you're going to have a 1-year guarantee. I would like to see that be a 2-year and maybe have something in there about some kind of watering of those trees.
I'm just taking some notes here that you're referring to the specifications.
For the planting. I'm okay with the species list. Species list is about what you'd expect for an area that potentially has flooding issues. Everything's native. So I'm not too worried about that. And it seems fine to me.
I guess I had a question now that you mentioned that, Brian, with the 70% threshold. How is that to be determined? Is that, if we see an issue, or will there be, some sort of, contractor make that judgment call, or how does that, get decided on your side?
The way we would decide that is, so these are the specifications that we've put on the contractor, and it's their responsibility. So we would work with you, the city, to be comfortable with that we've achieved that that standard. And if we haven't achieved that standard, we would issue something to the contractor to indicate that. But my expectation is that we would work with the city to make that determination before we pushed it to the contractor to address.
And maybe if the 2 years of maintenance or responsibility is acceptable, we could schedule a walkthrough or do our own walkthrough, in 2 years' time from planting.
We'd be happy to do that with you. And in fact, I mean, my expectation is that we'll be engaging with the city much more frequently than that, right? It would be pretty bad form for us to get all the approvals we need and then disappear for a couple of years while we utilize it.
Sure. And I don't want it to be lost on the work that's needing to be done too. We've encountered this a couple of times before where, we realize that while nobody wants a loss of trees, loss of canopy, loss of bank stabilization, that the work that's being done here, on scale is significantly larger and better for the environment than what currently exists now.
I mean, PCBs stay in the system for a couple hundred years, isn't it?
Yeah, they don't naturally degrade very rapidly. So unless we physically remove them, they're going to be there for our lifetimes and our children's lifetimes.
So it's a great project, and like I said, I do appreciate all of the information that's been provided. Again, I'll ask if there's any other questions or comments to the committee.
So I do have another question, and I apologize for not having gotten the package ahead of time, so maybe this has already been addressed. But removal of mature trees is of course a pretty significant impact, because a mature tree has a lot of more function than a new sapling. And so oftentimes in projects that we've talked about, the replacement ratio has been more than 1-to-1. So I'm kind of curious in this particular project why the replacement ratio is only 1-to-1.
The answer to that's twofold, Gail. The first is that in a lot of areas immediately adjacent to the bank, the density of the trees is pretty high there. And so if we were to replace it at more than a 1-to-1 ratio, we'd exceed the density expectations of the tree ordinance. With respect to trees in the park, that is not immediately on the shoreline. our plan is to replace the trees that exist there without necessarily massively changing the park. That said, if the Parks Department needs us or would like us to put in a few extra trees, we're happy to do that. We'd like to do that in conjunction with the Parks Department to make sure we're putting them in the right locations and everyone's comfortable with where they're going in to maintain the function of the park from a recreational standpoint.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from, and Chase, I understand your point as well. I think this site has some challenges in that you can't replace in that same location with the same density that existed there before. I do think that, again, similar to the project that we had when Consumers was here, realizing the need for not diminishing any air quality that we can, and really maintaining canopy growth in this area, and certainly recognizing that this is Parks property, and we don't make decisions for Parks and Rec and what happens on their property. If we were to agree to a higher ratio, especially for the loss of larger trees and replacing, I'm imagining a 2 or 3 inch caliper sapling that would be placed in its loss. Could we take that net, whatever, you can replace 1-to-1 on the site, but whatever else is left over that we could either have or take as our own to plant in available right-of-way area nearby.
We'd be very comfortable with that. It's a matter of restoring both the ecological function of the resource, but also to meet our obligations here. And so in terms of where ultimately the city and the Parks Department would like to see that 1-to-1 replaced, we're happy to work with you in whatever capacity meets that, including rearranging where they actually sit within the park. And I don't think there's any issue if the decision is that we don't want as much density within the park. We'll still meet that 1-to-1 obligation by providing the trees. I don't know how it would work from a 2-year guarantee standpoint if they're not replanted within the area that we're working, but I think we could probably work that out.
Yeah, we wouldn't. That seems fair. Especially, if we're planting trees somewhere else on our own right of way, I think we could, kind of come to a compromise there for sure, to make the contractor only responsible for those trees planted as part or on this site.
Yeah, we certainly wouldn't have any objection to that.
And I guess the big unknown remaining is just how many trees that is. But we've seen with pretty much all of these projects that the value of the tree that's lost, no matter what your replacement ratio is that we've ever decided on, it's still significantly less. So,
and I'll tell you, one of the things that was brought up was a 2-year guarantee. I think Brian brought that up, and we could certainly, if you'd like to approve the project and condition that, I don't think we have any objection to giving you a 2-year guarantee on those, on the replacement or growth of those trees.
So if we could make this, I guess the edits to where it is a 2-year guarantee with, we can do a walkthrough 2 years from now and evaluate the condition. And obviously trying to minimize the loss of trees as much as possible. And then change that 1-to-1 to a 2-to-1 replacement, understanding that only one tree will be replaced on the property, with us to plant the other, take the responsibility for and plant the other sapling in nearby right-of-way space. I think that would really be to the best of everyone's interest.
I agree.
So Anthony, would you like us to revise the document that we sent you that incorporates that, or would you like us to confirm it via email? What's the appropriate mechanism to memorialize that?
If that could be revised and just sent for our records, we can make a motion on that today, and we'll have our copy of the minutes. But if that could be revised at some point in the future and just sent over, that would be great too.
Yeah, I think that's the way we would rather handle it too. Then, if we can get your agreement on what's written, then everybody's on the same page.
And do you, I mean, for your project files, do you need minutes or, any kind of formal?
I'll probably reach into the city's archives and download the minutes when they're formalized. But if in the short term, once we send back a revised version, if you could acknowledge it, and especially acknowledge that it hits what we talked about today, that would be helpful.
Okay. Well, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, would somebody on the committee care to make a motion?
Make a motion to approve, as long as we have the 2-for-1 replacement with the 2-year guarantee, and we all stay in contact to see where they're going and what trees are going to be removed in the future.
All those in favor? Or is there a second?
I'll support that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. I really appreciate it. Chase, Chad, and Anita. Thank you for your time. And like I said, I really, it should not be lost with what a great project this really is for the city and just for the area and for the river itself.
Well, and now you have our email addresses. To the extent that the different organizations that you represent within the city have questions, we are absolutely at your disposal to help people understand what we're doing out here. We think it's really important, really beneficial to the resources, but also to the city. So don't hesitate to take us up on that, please.
Thank you. Yeah, we're certainly looking forward to it. All right. We will move on through the agenda. As I mentioned at the beginning, our second item.
Sign off.
Oh, thank y'all.
All right. Thank you.
So yeah, as I said, moving on to the down new business on the agenda here, we did have an item today for 105 Walbridge Street to be presented by Adams Outdoor. That item, I would like to move to table that today until we can get better determination on if that actually is in the right of way, or if that belongs on, or if those trees are currently sitting on private property. So we're going to have to do a little more legwork on our end to figure that out. And if it is determined that is on city right of way, we will bring that item back for consideration from the committee. Moving down, we do have one item of old business, the Bank Street Realignment Project. And for this month, I do not have anything new to report for that. I had mentioned before this meeting officially started that we do have the landscaping plans now for the site. And we are in conversation with the consultant that's over that job. So hopefully we will have an update in the months to come. But obviously with winter coming, we will not be doing anything actively for the next several months. But we are working to develop a plan. Really, and I know that we will be planting trees along the eastern side of Bank Street on city right of way, but the real intent is to maximize as many plantings as possible for this project. But I do not have anything additional to add to that at this time. Any questions or concerns on that? And Gail, I do intend that at some point for this to be, to have at least one on-site meeting at some point based on this landscaping plan. I know we had talked about that previously. Okay. We don't have any action items listed, but I do know that there was an action item that was up for its annual review. So that we should include that in the minutes to add that to this agenda for discussion or just for report. Brian, have you had the chance to take a look at that yet, or should we provide an update next month?
I think next month. I'm not sure which one you're talking about.
Okay. We will add that item to old business for the next tree committee agenda. That concludes action items. Are there any public comments today?
No public comments at this time.
Thank you. Any committee comments? Hearing.
Contract starts in a couple days, 300 trees throughout the city. So that's good.
Could you say that again, Brian? I didn't catch the first part of what you.
The planting contract starts, they're supposed to be in town tomorrow. Markouts already happened, flags are in the ground. 300 trees going in within the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it. This was a project that was bid earlier this year and awarded to Twin Lakes Nursery, close to Grand Rapids, north of here. This is the second year that they've actually had our tree planting project. The first year, last year, was 100 trees, 150. So for us to get to the point where we're able to, I mean, there's nothing that 100 tree planting project is something to celebrate in and of itself, but for us to ramp that up to 300 is really something to celebrate.
Yep.
And we intend on bidding out another planting project for a spring planting or a late spring planting that will be that'll go out to bid probably late winter of 2022.
Yep. And so the weather's holding up good for us for planting right now too. So supposed to get warmer, and the trees that are growing in the ground are already dormant, and we're not planting any evergreens, so we should be good. So.
What is the status of the tree inventory that was happening? Has that been completed? Where is that at?
Completed. The paperwork is getting done in the next couple of weeks, I was told. So they're making a large packet that it delves more into what the inventory means, or what the inventory will show, certain percentages of things, and they'll delve into it a little bit. But we have the information already. It's just that we're getting the deliverables the next couple of weeks.
Great. I'll look forward to seeing that.
Yeah.
Part of that project was for them to submit a long-term management plan for the city, and it's not. It is tailored based on the information from this inventory. It's not. It's purely recommendational, not something that that we would wholeheartedly endorse and put into place, unless it's hard to say without seeing it yet. But that was part of that project, was for them to make a recommendation through a long-term management plan based on this information. So that'll be part of it as well. Actually, I did write this down because I wonder, if we could have, we should talk to Davy Resource Group to see if they would be willing to put together some sort of presentation just for the committee, or something that we could have them on as part of the tree committee meeting, just so that it can be public information.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do have that information, and I think they said something close to 30,000 right-of-way trees. Is that 27?
I believe it's closer to mid-20s with a lot of planting spaces and such.
Yeah, that's a lot of trees.
These are all right-of-way trees. These aren't including our well fields or parks or green spaces that the city owns throughout the city as well. These are all essentially city street right-of-way trees. And that number probably, if you, it's a hard estimate, you're looking at 30,000 plus if you include all the other properties that the city owns as well.
Okay, any other committee comments? Hearing none, I guess I would make a motion to adjourn.
Seconded.
Assuming everyone's in favor, I really appreciate it. Thank you for your time. Look forward to seeing everyone soon, and look forward to sending out some emails on updates for our tree ordinance, this information from Davy Resource Group on our tree inventory, and about our next meeting.
Good.
Right.
Thank you.
Bye.